Today I'm going to talk about two of the most important people you have never heard of. Now, before we get into that, probably most of you have heard of John James Audubon. He was an American ornithologist or birder who was born in what is now Haiti, and he lived from 1785 to 1851. The American Audubon Society is named after him, as well as many towns and streets. John James Audubon's big contribution to ornithology was a multi-volume book edition called The Birds of America. It was a beautiful collection of birding prints in full color and in extra large format. Many people frame and hang copies of these pictures on their walls today, and you may have seen some without even realizing where they were from. Some of you may have also heard of Alexander Wilson, whose 4-volume set of books, American Ornithology, was a very detailed look at birds in 19th century America. But before both Audubon and Wilson, there were two other important people in the field of birding. Two of the most important people you probably have never heard of before. We'll talk about them now and show you their books in the few minutes that we have together. The first is Mark Catesby, Catesby. He was an Englishman who was born 100 years before Audubon, and he lived from 1685 to 1749. He visited North America, traveled throughout the southeast U.S., and made pictures of the plants and animals he came across, focusing on birds. His book, The Natural History of Carolina, Florida, and the Bahama Islands, was the very first biological study of plants and animals of what is now North and South Carolina, the southeast U.S., and the Bahamas too. It was completed and published in 1743. The two oversized volumes are in dual languages, French and English, and the pictures are beautiful. These volumes are very, very rare today, and Hackney Library here at Barton College owns a near-exact replica of the original set. Anyone can make an appointment to see it in our special collections. Let's take a quick look at one of the pictures in the book. As you can see, it's a very, very large book. This is one example from the book of the little white heron. You can see it's a beautiful painting, and up on top is the Latin name of the bird, Ardea alba minor carolinensis. The carolinensis, of course, comes from Carolina. This is where Catesby first saw this particular bird in the Carolinas, and that's why today many birds have carolinensis, or a Latin version of that, in their name, because Catesby first saw many of these birds in the Carolinas. Natural History was published in the last decades of Catesby's life. It is not known whether John James Audubon later saw the plates of the book, and so we are not sure if he was influenced by them for his book. The works are somewhat similar, but Audubon traveled further and saw a wider variety of birds. The other person I want to talk to you about today is Thomas Bewick. His last name sounds like the car, Buick, but it's spelled B-E-W-I-C-K. Bewick was British. He lived from 1753 to 1828. He, like Catesby, was born well before Audubon, 62 years before Audubon. But because of his long life, he overlapped with Audubon's lifetime for about 43 years. Bewick is notable for 4 reasons. Number 1, he researched, wrote, and illustrated what is often considered the first pocket birding guide. Bewick's first complete book, A History of British Birds, Volume 1, Land Birds, was published in 1797. It is considered the first modern field guide, too. It is small and portable, has etchings and descriptions of many birds, and is easy to read and use. Number 2, Bewick used hardwood engraving against the grain, which made it easier to print with engravings and text together in books. This also led to lower prices for book production. Now, before Buick, wood engravings were not finely done and would not line up well with the metal type used for the text part of book pages. By using strong tools normally used for metal engraving and by going against the grain of the wood, he was able to make illustrations that would line up well with text blocks in books. Since wood is inked on the surface rather than in the hollowed out areas, it does not take much pressure to print the illustrations, and the blocks last a very long time. These innovations help lower the cost of all illustrated books going forward throughout the world, making books more available to the working classes. Number 3, Buick's engravings implicitly advocated for a return to the simpler pleasures of nature, such as walking, fishing, pond observation, and enjoying the outdoors in general. Besides using bird engravings in his book, Buick inserted little pictures or vignettes of relaxing pastoral scenes around rural Britain, also called tailpieces. These images were a big hit and used in many other places too, such as book plates and children's books. Now, before we get to reason number 4, Hackney Library's copy of Buick's book is a very special and unique one of the most unique in the entire world. Let's take a quick look at it. Here is the book, and as you can see, it is small and portable, making it ideal for taking out into the field and stream. This book is in the original binding. It has a leather cover along with patterned marbled papers. One of the reasons our copy in the Hackney Library is so special is because it has a lot of ephemera or additional paper material tipped into the book, that is attached to the book by owners throughout the years. You can see here on the inside front cover, we have a bookseller's label up in the front, a date from a newspaper right here, and although I know it's hard to read, right underneath that is an obituary of Buick's oldest daughter. Underneath is a letter that was written for future generations to let people who owned the book know what was in the book. It was written by a man, George Gulliver, who owned the book and who could see that in the back there were some proofs of the book, proofs of the specific bird engravings to be exact, and a former owner had owned them. Here's an example of one of the bird engravings in the book. This is the willow wren. Here's an example of a tailpiece that we just talked about. And then here are some proofs. Proofs are test engravings that were done for the book. And a friend of Buick, Dr. Lawrence Edmonston, was given some of these, and so he bound them into the book. And you can see some of these proofs right here. And then as we get a little further back, we have a receipt from Buick for another one of his books. He did an edition of Aesop's Fables. This is how he did his receipts. He has a little thumbprint here, and then he actually pasted some seaweed to a night scene that he engraved. If we go back a little further, there is a letter, a handwritten letter from Buick to Dr. Edmonston, thanking him for sending him a stuffed bird that he was able to use in the book. And what's nice about this letter is that it shows how they used to mail letters in the early 1800s. The letter was actually part of the envelope. Someone would take the letter and then fold it up and make it into the envelope and mail it that way. Number 4, Buick implicitly promoted animals and animal welfare. He loved engraving pictures of animals. Besides birds, he also worked on fish engravings and even made a book about quadrupeds, or animals with 4 feet. Near the end of his life, Buick saw an old horse outdoors on a very cold, snowy night at a neighbor's farm, a horse who nobody wanted anymore. The horse was literally starving to death. It was thin and emaciated. Buick made an engraving of the animal and had plans to sell copies of it to raise money to combat animal abuse. He died before he was able to start sales of the horse's image. However, the engraving was found after his death, and some prints of it were made in a limited edition of 250. Hackney Library has one of the copies. Let's take a look at it. Here's the engraving here, and you can see the horse, cold night. It's very, very emaciated and thin. Buick's idea was to use the funds from this to benefit the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. I hope that you enjoyed our discussion of Mark Catesby and Thomas Buick today. If you have any questions or would like to see in person the books that we've discussed, please feel free to contact me at rcagna@barton.edu or give me a call or stop by the library.